I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 90 of the House and Commons Standing Committee on Natural Resources, pursuant to the order of reference of Tuesday, October the 17th, 2023, and the adopted motion of Wednesday, December 13th, 2023. The committee is resuming the clause-by-clause consideration of Bill C-49, an act to amend the Canada, Newfoundland, and Labrador Atlantic Accord Implementation Act and the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum Resources Accord Implementation Act, and to make consequential amendments to other acts. Since today's meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, I would like to make a few comments for the benefit of members and witnesses. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you are not speaking. Interpretation for those on Zoom. You have the choice at the bottom of your screen of either Floor, English, or French. For those in the room, you can use the earpiece and select the desired channel. Although this room is equipped with a powerful audio system, feedback events can occur. These can be extremely harmful to interpreters and cause serious injuries. The most common cause of feedback is an earpiece worn too close to a microphone. We therefore ask all participants to exercise a high degree of caution when handling the earpieces, especially when your microphone or your neighbor's microphone is turned on. In order to prevent incidents and safeguard the hearing health of interpreters, I invite participants to ensure that they speak into the microphone into which their headset is plugged in, and to avoid manipulating the earbuds by placing them on the table away from the microphone when they are not in use. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. Additionally, screenshots or taking photos of your screen is not permitted. With us today to answer your questions from the Department of Justice, Jean-Nicolas Bastros, Counsel. Also from the Department of Justice, Jean-François Roman, Legal Counsel. From the Department of Natural Resources, Abigail Lixfeld, Senior Director, Renewable and Electrical Energy Division, Energy System Sector. Annette Tobin, Director, Offshore Management Division, Fuel Sector. Lauren Knowles, Deputy Director. Cheryl McNeil, Deputy Director. Danielle Morin, Senior Legislative and Policy Advisor, Renewable and Electrical Energy Division, as well as the legislative clerks from the House of Commons, Dancela Boyi and Emily Thivierge. Now we will proceed. At the last meeting, the committee adopted Clause 125. There are no amendments submitted to Clauses 126 to 135. Do we have unanimous consent to group them for a vote? Shall Clauses 126 to 135 carry? Yes. Please call the roll, please.
Mr. Eldig?
Yes.
Mr. Bruson?
Yes.
Madame Lapointe?
Oui.
Mr. Sabara?
Yes.
Mr. Verbeinen?
It's about to come up, so I'll speak to it.
Mr. Verbeinen? Yes. Mr. Dreeshen? Mr. Falk?
Yep.
Mr. Patzer?
Yes.
Mr. Simard?
No.
Mr. Angus?
Yes.
9 yeas, 1 nay.
Clauses 126 to 135 have carried. We'll now proceed to Clause 136. We have new CPC 11. Do we have a member who would like to move CPC 11?
I'm good.
Okay, Mr. Patzer, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I really appreciate it. So we would be in Clause 136 be amended by replacing lines 1 to 3 on page 94 with the following. 2.1. An order made by the regulator in a case referred to in paragraph 1A with respect to a submerged land license takes effect immediately, but is subject to sections 38.1 to 38.3. There is no specific requirement to consider the fish or their habitats or any applicable regional or strategic assessments by the minister or the regulator making decisions on call for bids or submerged land licenses. If the American experience is of any value, then you'll note that once a call for bids or SLL is issued, the pressure for development is overwhelming regardless of the environmental issues that are later identified. At minimum, Canadians should expect to see such required consideration in the parent legislation that enables the call for bids or granting of submerged land licenses.
Well, it makes sense to me.
So, seems like a pretty common sense addition to the legislation, and I think we heard some compelling witness testimony that would help to make this a solid addition to the bill. So,
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. I'll now go to Mr. Bruson.
And actually, I was just hoping that maybe I could ask some of our experts here for some information. Like, my understanding is that the regulator can already, decide to issue orders to address safety issues and like. But in here, there's a piece that seems to be dealing with ministerial decision-making too. Maybe if you can explain to me, what would be the impact of the amendment that's proposed?
Thank you very much for the question. So this particular section of the bill deals with prohibitions. So it is orders that would be given to stop work or activities in the event of certain circumstances. In the event of a major health and safety issue where life and limb is at issue, an order made by the regulator takes effect immediately because the regulator needs to respond to an emergency situation. All other decisions that are made by the regulator do need to go through a ministerial decision process, and that's what's outlined in the 1A. So the effect of this amendment would be that decisions of the regulator don't actually need to be considered by government, and that the regulator would be able to take those decisions unilaterally. And it also, this particular amendment appears exclusively in the renewables section. There is the previous clause pertains to decisions taken under the petroleum side of the mandate. So there would be a discrepancy between a decision taken for petroleum and a decision taken with respect to renewables. And of course, that same clause does not appear in the Nova Scotia portion of the bill, in the Newfoundland portion of the bill, as this particular amendment is only on the Nova Scotia side. And to the extent possible, we strive for symmetry between the Nova Scotia and the Newfoundland. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, no, that's very helpful because obviously we need to be making sure that the two mirror one another. And I also am interested by the fact that it would be impacting renewables differently. And I find comfort in the part that immediate orders, when it's a health and safety issue, would take effect immediately. So based on everything that I've heard, I'll be opposing this amendment.
Mr. Angus.
Thank you. Yes, I had studied this and was wondering and looked into it, and I thank our witnesses here for their testimony because I think it would send a very bad message if we're going to put limits and obligations on renewables that are exempting from petroleum. That would send, I think, a very negative message. So I think this is, perhaps it was brought forward in with good intent, but it would have definitely negative consequences.
Okay, I don't see. Oh, Ms. Stubbs, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I can certainly see that the NDPs propping up their Liberal masters will defeat this amendment. But just to my colleague's comment, I would just remind him that if he truly is concerned about the difference in the treatment between petroleum, between offshore petroleum and renewable development in C49, then of course he should have agreed with our amendments that would deal with the fact that in C49, actually that decision timing for a call to a bid for licenses under C49 will be triple the time for offshore renewables than it currently is for petroleum, which will be also maintained in its current timeline in C49. But I could see that they've already decided on what to do with this particular amendment. Thanks, Chair.
Okay, I don't see any further debate, so we'll proceed to a vote. Call the roll, please.
Mr. Aldag,
No.
Mr. Bruson,
No.
Madame Lapointe,
No.
Mr. Sorbara,
No.
Mr. Van Bynen,
No.
Mr. Dreeshen,
Yes.
Mr. Falk,
Yes.
Mr. Patzer,
Yes.
Ms. Stubbs,
Yes.
Monsieur Simard,
Contre.
Mr. Angus.
Yes.
5 yeas.
I was thrown off by my colleague. Sorry. No. No.
That's a no.
She almost did. Sorry. No.
Thank you. It was so close.
4
You
yeas.
almost
Seven yeas.
had me there. I was so thrown by her comments to me that
CPC 11 is defeated. Shall clause 136 carry? Please call the roll.
Mr. Aldag,
Yes.
Mr. Bruson, Madame Lapointe, Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. McDonald,
Yes.
Mr. Sabara,
Yes.
Mr. Dreeshen, Mr. Falk,
Yep.
Mr. Patzer,
Yep.
Ms. Stubbs,
Yes.
Mr. Simard,
No.
Mr. Angus.
yes.
10 yeas, 1 nay.
Clause 136 carries. We'll now proceed to clause 137, G15. Mr. Bruson.
This should be fairly straightforward one. It's correcting a typo by removing the word "the" that appears before the word "unactive." So we need to remove the word "the." It doesn't fit in grammatically. So I'm hoping everyone will agree to that.
Thank you. I don't see any further debates. We'll now go to the vote. Please call the roll on G15.
Mr. Aldag,
Yes.
Mr. Bruson,
Yes.
Madame Lapointe, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Sabara,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Dreeshen, Mr. Falk,
Yep.
Mr. Patzer,
Yes.
Ms. Stubbs,
Yes.
Monsieur Simard,
Oui.
Mr. Angus.
Yes.
11 yeas, no nays.
It's carried unanimously. Shall clause 137 carry as amended? Please call the roll.
Mr. Aldag,
Yes.
Mr. Bruson,
Yes.
Madame Lapointe,
We.
Mr. McDonald, Mr. Van Bynen,
Yes.
Mr. Dreeshen,
Yes.
Mr. Falk, Mr. Patzer,
Yes.
Ms. Stubbs,
Yes.
Monsieur Simard,
No.
Mr. Angus.
Yes.
10 yeas, 1 nay.
Clause 137 carries as amended. We'll now proceed to the next clauses. There are no amendments submitted to clauses 138 to 146. Do we have unanimous consent to group them for the vote? Shall clauses 138 to 146 carry? Please call the roll.
Mr. Aldag,
Yes.
Mr. Bruson,
Yes.
Madame Lapointe, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Van Bynen,
Yes.
Mr. Dreeshen,
Yes.
Mr. Falk,
Yep.
Mr. Patzer,
Yes.
Ms. Stubbs,
Yes.
Monsieur Simard,
No.
Mr. Angus.
Yes.
10 yeas, 1 nay.
Clauses 138 to 146 carry. We'll now proceed to clause 147, BQ 27. Monsieur Samard?
Je vais. I'm going to withdraw BQ 27 and 28 as they were introduced in the new bill, and they were rejected at that time. So the same logic will apply in this case.
What? Thank you, Monsieur Samard. You're withdrawing BQ 27 to BQ 29, just to clarify, so thank you. We will proceed to new NDP 2. Mr. Angus.
Yes, I'm trying to keep similar position on both the Newfoundland Labrador Accord and as well as what we have in Nova Scotia. We have a belief that when we're making these commitments so that the jobs are not just being taken offshore, particular competitors in the United States or Europe or elsewhere, that we have job obligations and commitments that we're looking for. So I will move this motion.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Mr. Bruson.
I appreciate Mr. Angus's comments, but this is similar to NDP 1, which did not pass, and to ensure consistency between the Newfoundland and Nova Scotia versions of this bill, I oppose the motion, suggest that we vote against it.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Patzer.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just, echo the same argument that we made in the previous, we had a similar motion done previously, and that is that, the intent behind them seems fine and all that, but when it comes down to practicality, you'll have a bunch of people that'll be trained for a job, and then they'll be out of a job not very long after, because there's only going to be so many machines set up, and then they, in fact, will be the ones who will be traveling internationally and abroad to do all that work. So while the intent is fine, practicality, it just doesn't work, so I'll be voting against.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. I don't see any further debate. Please call the roll.
Mr. Aldag?
No.
Mr. Bruson?
No.
Madame Lapointe?
No.
Mr. McDonald? Mr. Van Bynen?
No.
Mr. Dreeshen?
No.
Mr. Falk? No. Mr. Patzer?
No.
Ms. Stubbs?
No.
Mr. Simard?
Oui.
Mr. Angus?
We
2 yeas, 9 nays.
NDP 2 is defeated. We'll now proceed to CPC 12. Do we have a member who would like to move CPC 12?
CPC 12.
That's you. Would you like to move it?
Sure.
Sure. Ms.
Thank
Stubbs,
you,
go
Chair.
ahead.
Thanks very much. So our CPC 12 amendment would be that Bill C-49 in Clause 147 be amended by adding, after line 27 on page 107, the following. C, importance shall be given to the development of measures to assist in the preservation of the fishing industry, including measures to assist in understanding and maintaining the environmental characteristics of the offshore area that support that industry. This is, of course, because there are countless livelihoods and small businesses of generational families in Atlantic Canada in the fishery and lobster harvesters sectors where the habitats and the marine ecology in the area may be impacted by developments. That's why the CPC amendment has been proposed to ensure that this bill includes those considerations and these clear principles in favor of the natural environment and the balance for existing ocean users building their livelihoods and their businesses off of the ocean. And the balance in those principles could, we believe, be easily achieved by including this amendment in the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. Go to Mr. Bruson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this is similar to CPC 7. And while agreeing with the intent of the motion, I'll be opposing it. I think that it's worthwhile for us to look at the letters that have been sent to our committee by Minister Parsons, Minister of Industry, Energy and Technology from Newfoundland and Labrador, and Minister Rushton, Minister of Natural Resources and Renewables from Nova Scotia, saying that they actually oppose this amendment. Specifically, if I would go to the letter from Minister Parsons, and to quote the letter, it says, "We do, however, have several concerns with this amendment as drafted above. Ensuring the sustainability of the fishing industry involves a comprehensive understanding of the environmental factors shaping it, extending beyond the purview of the Accords Acts, and encompassing considerations beyond interactions with energy projects. This amendment also fails to recognize the evaluation of potential impacts from energy projects is already assessed through spatial planning. such as the regional assessments and regulatory review processes outlined in the existing Accords Act and Bill C-49. Most notably, however, the acceptance of this amendment does not align with the principles of joint management. It goes on, but I think that that gives you an idea. And that opinion is reflected in the letter from the Minister of Natural Resources and Renewables from Nova Scotia as well. So I will be opposing this CPC amendment motion, but we'll be proposing a sub-amendment to ensure fishers are given importance through the license issuance process associated with this principal section, while keeping the language in scope of the purpose and mandate of the Accords Acts and responsibilities of ministers and regulators under the Acts. And I believe that there is a copy of the sub-amendments which can be distributed to the members. I move that motion CPC 12, proposing to amend Clause 147 of Bill C-49, be amended by adding text after line 27 on page 107, and it's be amended by A, substituting for the reference to, quote, importance, close quote, a reference to, quote, during the submerged land license issuance process, comma, importance, close quote, and B, substituting for the reference to, quote, development of measures to assist in the preservation of the fishing industry, comma, including measures to assist in understanding and maintaining the environmental characteristics of the offshore areas that support that industry, close quote, a reference to, quote, considerations of effects on fishing activities, close quotes. I'm going to ask actually the government officials if they can maybe provide to us some greater clarity on the issues with the language in CPC 12, the previous CPC 7, and what this sub-amendment does to capture the spirit of CPC 12 while respecting the joint management principles that were raised in the letter I just read, and the scope of Division 5 and the acts more appropriately or broadly.
Thank you very much for the question. We did share the concerns that were outlined by the provinces about the scope of this proposed amendment, and it likely falling outside of really the purpose of the Accord Acts, which is, as you know, really about the regulation of offshore energy projects. The Act set out certain requirements with respect to safety and environmental protection and the consideration of interactions between potential offshore energy projects and other users of the sea. Management of the fishing industry and the environment do fall beyond the scope of the Acts. In addition, this particular section of the bill in which this amendment appears pertains to the land tenure process specifically and the process for issuing submerged land licenses. The motion that was put forward includes reference to the development of measures related to environmental management, and it's really not well placed in this section of the Act. So the motion as drafted could be challenging for the regulators to implement. The consideration of environmental effects takes place at a number of points in the regulatory process, for example, through the regional assessments and marine spatial planning activities that happen before there is a call for bids that is issued. Governments have several opportunities to engage with Indigenous groups and stakeholders about potential wind energy areas, including fishers, and of course through the impact assessment and regulatory authorization phases of work that happen in Part 3 when there's an actual project that needs to be considered. We certainly did reflect on the testimony that was presented by the fisher sector throughout the hearings and through further engagement subsequent to the tabling of the bill, and we agree that the bill can be further strengthened to reflect government's intent to consider the impacts of offshore energy development on the fishing sector. And we feel that the amendment that is proposed and that has the support of both provinces is in keeping with the scope of the Accord Acts, fits well with this particular section with respect to land tenure, and does acknowledge the importance of the fishing sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Bousson.
If I can get some further clarity, this entire clause is in respect of renewables only? Am I correct?
That's correct.
Mr. Bousson, anything else?
No.
Okay, thank you. We're going to go to Mr. Angus, and I have others on the speaking list afterwards. Go ahead, Mr. Angus.
Thank you. Well, it's very important that we get this right, and don't want to show my age, but I've been involved in lots of legislation, but never one quite as complicated because we're dealing with accords that exist with Newfoundland, Labrador, and Nova Scotia, and existing accords, and so we're trying to untie this Gordian knot of very complex issues. And at the heart of it, for me, of course, is that we have to make sure that we protect the environment and protect the fisheries, the people who are using the waters right now. And so I very much thanked my Conservative colleagues, and I'd supported their motion in the first part of this. I was surprised when I saw the letters from Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia, and we had to look into that. So I guess my question before I decide, Ms. Lichfield, does this amendment cover off concerns in terms of making sure that the concerns of the fishers are being heard and that there are obligations that the board has to address? And would this help, if we support this amendment, would it cover that?
Thank you for the question. I don't feel equipped to speak on behalf of FFAW and what specifically would meet their request. I think their testimony was fairly clear. One of the things that we needed to do was stay within the scope of the purpose of the Accord Acts, and also respect the role of government in deciding how its resources should best be developed. And there is potentially some tension or some conflict there. And through the measures that have been proposed in these Accord Acts, there are opportunities for government to do work to better understand the potential impacts of a particular activity on the environment, on fishers and other stakeholders, as well as balance its needs for the development of renewable energy technology. So we do feel that the amendment as proposed does further strengthen and acknowledge the importance that both levels of government place on the fishing sector, the importance of balancing environmental considerations while also being true to the spirit of the Accord Acts.
Well, thank you. I did not want to put you in a position where you're having to speak for the fishers, and I certainly heard from Unifor, and they're very clear, and I'm very proud of their work. What I did want to clarify, and so you said it, is that this amendment is not undermining the work, but actually recognizes that within the balance of the accord, these issues have to be considered, and it strengthens it. So is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Thank you.
Mr. Angus, you're good? Okay, thank you. I'm going to go to Mr. Falk.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I would just like a little bit of a clarity. The official, Ms. Lichfield, referred to the amendment. Are you referring to the amendment or the sub-amendment? Or I was a little confused always to which one you were speaking to. And so if you could provide clarity with that, but also because we are actually talking about the sub-amendment, if I could get a hard copy to look at, I don't have a copy of it.
Yeah.
And I think you want one too, right? Or you meant sub-amendment?
I meant sub-amendment, but I wouldn't mind seeing a hard copy as well.
And Mario would probably like it in his language as well.
Yeah.
Isn't that what you call it? Isn't that what you call it?
Yeah.
So, colleagues, okay, Mr. Falk has asked for an email was sent out, but you would like a hard copy is what you've mentioned to me, Mr. Falk, and I think I heard that from others as well. So we will suspend until we can get a hard copy over to everyone. So we'll suspend for a few minutes. Suspended. are back from our suspension. We were on CPC 12, and there was a sub-amendment moved by Mr. Bruson, and Mr. Falk had asked for a hard copy of the sub-amendment, which has been provided, and I believe everybody's been able to review it. So, Mr. Falk, you had the floor prior to suspension, and you do have your hard copy, so I want to give you an opportunity to continue.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I appreciate that, and I appreciate the hard copy because now we can see exactly what the sub-amendment is proposing to change in the original amendment that Conservatives are providing to this Liberal bill. I think I'm satisfied with what it says, and I'm gonna understand that the comments made by Ms. Lichsfeld were in reference to the sub-amendment.
Yes, the concerns that I outlined were with respect to the amendment that had been proposed, and my comments in terms of how to address them in the language that was supported by the provinces is what appears in the sub-amendment. I apologize
thank you.
for...
Thank you for clarifying that. I'm good. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Falk. Mr. Patzer, I also had you on the list.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I guess only one point of concern I have with the sub-amendment. Now, just to be clear, after we're done doing the sub-amendment, Chair, we're still dealing with the speaking list of the actual amendment too when we're done?
We will go back to, I had you on the speaking order of the amendment as well. So once you're done, we will proceed by voting on the sub-amendment if there's no further debate. Then we'll go back to the amendment, conclude debate or have a vote, and then we will proceed to the clause.
Okay, because I got comments for both parts here, so I'll save some of them for just the amendment to that, but I'll just deal with the parts in the sub-amendment here. I think part of like what's being removed from the amendment by the sub-amendment in particular is the wording, the environmental characteristics of the offshore area that support that industry. I think that's a very important phrase to possibly keep in there. Reason being, we heard witnesses talk extensively about characteristics of the seabed that are impacted by having multiple wind turbines anchored to the ocean floor. Also with all the interconnecting cabling and things like that, that does alter the characteristics of the ocean floor, which changes the habitat for the various species that do live on or right close to the bottom of the ocean. So I think it's important to recognize that that is a very important factor in this discussion. To just simply say consideration of effects on fishing activities, well, that's only about fishing in and of itself, but it's not actually about the environment that the fish live in or that the other species of the ocean live in as well too. And I think that's why having that specific language around environmental characteristics was included by my colleague from Lakeland here. So I think it's important to make sure that it's a fulsome point in there, particularly because where this amendment, the original amendment is located is in regards to the principles of this portion of the bill, which is also the general rules of the offshore renewable portion. So I've got more comments on that a little bit later, which I'll do under the amendments when we get back to the original amendment. But as far as the sub-amendment goes, I think making sure that we talk about the environmental characteristics, I do think we need to make sure that there is some language in and around there just to make sure that we're not forgetting about the fact that there's so much more than just the fishing activity to consider when we're talking about the development of offshore renewable energy developments here. So, like I said, I've got more comments I'll use for the amendments, so I'll just stop right now, but yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. I'll go to Mr. Drushin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my question is the wording that we see in front of us, or the lettering that we see in front of this with the sub-amendment, because, of course, it says after line 27, we are then putting another A and a B into it. I mean, that is the way it is written here. I'm curious as to whether that is intended to be as a replacement for the line item C that we have as CPC 12, or whether that goes back and attempts to make changes in the A and the B, which of course it is saying it takes place after that. So I'd like some clarification. Are we simply saying because after line 27 is where we had talked about entering clause C for CPC 12, and the rest of this, it's unclear as to whether the intent is to take what we see in C and amend it as in the sub-amendment, and I'm questioning the way in which the lettering is done here.
Is there somebody who would like to address that?
It's your sub, yeah.
States where it fits, so it doesn't, it's not, like C you would have the A and the B added, and we're substituting the wording, so I can pull it out. That's exactly what I was just pulling out in the legislation if you want me to actually do the cross-reference for you, but the line pieces are quite clear. If the officials have it right in front of them, because I am turning to the right one right here. I have 147.
Just on a,
Yes.
if I could just respond
Yes,
so that
of course.
everyone knows what I'd like to see them looking for. When the legislation comes out and all of these things have to be cross-referenced, I just want to make sure that are we talking about, after in 98.7 under principles, are we talking about A, B, and then this C with adjustments to it? Or are we taking the A and B that is done in the sub-amendment and addressing the A and B, which comes from the principles there? Is this an entirely just a sub-amendment on CPC 12, which is the one that is labeled as item C?
Thank you, Mr. Dreeshen. Mr. Bruson has something to add, and I can also go to the legislative clerk, but I'll go to you,
Well,
Mr. Bruson.
I'll just point out that the way the sub-amendment is listed, the A and B are not part of the substitution wording, right? So just if that helps to clarify it, I'm sure the officials have something else to add, but the A and B is the wording of the sub-amendment. It's that we're saying A, we're proposing this substitution, and B, we're proposing this substitution. But the A,
We're the ones trying to put the principle in.
Mr. Bruson, would you like me to go to the legislative clerk?
yeah.
Yeah, our point in Peter Bruson is, of course, as conservatives who are trying to insert this principle in, we were attempting to do that with my amendment that says C. Now, thank goodness my colleagues have asked for the hard copy of A and B, which you propose. And so what they're asking is, will then it look like your A and B, which we agree, as indicated by MP Fulk, is a good expansion on and detailed follow-up on the proposal that, of course, conservatives have made to implement this principle into the bill. So their question, I think, is, will the A and B proposed in your sub-amendment replace the C, that is the principle that conservatives are trying to implement into this, which is the importance of the environmental characteristics in the marine ecology and the ocean floor, as well as the principle to protect, therefore, the livelihoods and small businesses of fisher and lobster men and women. And so that's what my colleagues are asking about, is that clarity for the sub-amendment that you've proposed, if then the legislation will look like A, B, and C, or if it will just be A and B replacing C. And I guess I'd like to thank the NDP Liberals and clearly the officials who worked on the sub-amendment before we got the hard copy for accepting the insertion of this important principle to protect the environment and the marine ecology on the ocean floor, as well as the livelihoods of fishermen and lobstermen. And I think we're prepared to support the sub-amendment if it just does better what the whole principle of this conservative amendment, specifically related, as you said, to the issuance of the surface land licenses. We'd just like to thank your acceptance and, I guess, improvement on the conservative attempt to insert these principles in the bill.
Okay, Mr. Bruson, back to you.
I'll ask the legislative clerk just to explain it, but it's a sub-amendment to the conservative amendment, and that's the way when you look through the wording. And I just do want to clarify that but I'll let the legislative clerk make sure that it's absolutely, that I'm using the correct terms when I'm saying that. But I also do want to just be clear that there had been an emailed copy of this amendment. So I'm glad everyone has a hard copy now, but it wasn't that this was a surprise sub-amendment. anyway, if maybe the legislative clerk can better explain, but what I've just said in a proper legal terms.
I'm going to go to the legislative clerk first, and I think that might address some of the concerns that have been, that have arisen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So, as it was mentioned, the sub-amendment is on the amendment, so it's not touching section 98.7A nor the B. It's just touching on the C. And if it were to be adopted, the new C would read as, during the submerged land license issuance process, importance shall be given to the consideration of effects on fishing activities. And in French, it would read, durant le nouveau C serait durant le processus d'octroi de permis visant des.
A repetition of what was said in English. Take into consideration effects on fishing activities.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the legislative clerk. I think that clarifies our confusion here on this side a little bit. Just the way the sub-amendment has been presented here, it looks as though there will be 2 additional sections added or replacing, but what it is you're just itemizing the changes. So the A and the B have no significance in the actual sub-amendment. It's just that there's going to be 2 changes to the amendment. That's all. I think that helps us clarify where things are at.
Great. Okay, well, I think as that is clarified, I think everybody understands. Thank you for all your, thank you for the sub-amendment, Mr. Brewson, and all your questions to provide clarification from everybody. We are now voting, just to be clear, on, there was a, CPC 12 was moved, and we had a sub-amendment moved by Mr. Brewson. So we are voting on the sub-amendment. Can we call the roll, please?
Mr. Aldag?
Yes.
Mr. Brewson?
Yes.
Madame Lapointe?
Oui.
Mr. McDonald? Mr. Van Bynen?
Yes.
Mr. Dreeshen?
Yes.
Mr. Falk?
Yep.
Mr. Patzer?
Yes.
Ms. Stubbs?
Yes.
Monsieur Simard?
Oui.
Mr. Angus?
Yes.
11 yeas, no nays.
Okay, so the sub-amendment has been carried. We'll now go to the amendment of CPC 12 as amended. But Mr. Patzer, now it is amended. You're on the speaking list, so I want to go to you to provide your commentary.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate that we've now got this hammered out. I would also just like to point out that, I got the email at 3:55 p.m. with the sub-amendment, so it's not like we would have had time to review it and try to propose any other amendments to the sub-amendment. So I'm just wondering if I could have the indulgence of the committee here to possibly try to make a... So as I alluded to in my remarks earlier around environmental characteristics, and I'm just wondering, because we've agreed on a good sub-amendment here, I'm just wondering if there's any way now to to propose an amendment to that sub-amendment. And I mean, maybe I have to come back with a written copy later, but I'd like to have a quick discussion about it right now, because I do think it's important to have environmental characteristics included in this new amended version of the amendment. And I'm just trying to envision it in my head because I don't have the actual text of what the new amendment looks like. But I do think that if we were to add, after consideration of effects on fishing activities, if we could add in consideration of effects on fishing activities and the environmental characteristics of the offshore area. I'm wondering if the committee would consider that, or I just want to get thoughts from the committee about that to see if there would be an appetite to do something in that effect. And if that's the case, then I'd be happy to work on a hard copy to distribute to the committee. But I want the committee's input first before I would go through all of that work, just to see what the appetite around the table would be for language like that. And then I like to get back to my other points, but I want to deal with this first, if that's okay.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer, for providing committee members for input. And we would need something in writing if you are prepared to move forward, but we will go to other members to comment. Go ahead, Mr. Bruson.
Maybe if I can go back to where I started in this conversation, which is that we actually have letters from 2 provincial ministers that specifically address the amendment that had been proposed by the Conservatives, including just the language is a little bit easier for me to quote in the context of the one from the minister from Newfoundland and Labrador, but specifically dealing with the environmental pieces, and we all have a copy of this letter. What the minister says is that this amendment fails to recognize the evaluation of potential impacts from energy projects is already assessed through spatial planning, such as regional assessments and regulatory review processes outlined in the existing Accords Act and Bill C-49. It goes on in a lot more detail, or a couple of pages here, but the main point being that these are like this bill is negotiated with the provinces and respecting the provinces and their input into how this is done. I would like us to take into account the correspondence that we received from the Minister from Nova Scotia and the Minister from Newfoundland and Labrador, and respect their champ de compétence. Thanks.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Bruson. I'm going to go back to you, Mr. Patzer.
Thank you. Now, I guess this would go into my comments I was going to say for later, but I think the reason why this is important is the existing accord deals with offshore petroleum development. Now, we're talking about one platform that's confined to a smaller area. We're talking about offshore renewables. You're talking about multiple points across a vast area and a vast landscape. That's why the concerns around the environmental characteristics of the ocean floor all of a sudden become a much bigger factor, because now you're dealing with, well, tens if not hundreds of square kilometers of area that are going to be taken out of fishing activities, but also now be at risk of significantly altering the environmental characteristics of that ocean floor. And that's why I'm talking about the specific characteristics or the environmental characteristics of that offshore area. Because, like I said, with petroleum, it's one platform. You might have multiple points down. It'll have the cables, the guy wires to help support it, yes, but when you factor in a wind farm and what that entails, it's so much more than what one petroleum platform would be. So you can't compare the two because they're not the same. There's some principles that do apply, but when you apply it broadly speaking to several individual turbines, and it does depend on if it's a floating wind farm, which I'm not sure how widely deployed those are at this point, but there still is an anchoring system that goes in there. But there will be multiple aspects to that floating wind farm. It's not just one floating apparatus. There'll be several of them, which means several points of tie down to the ocean floor. So we are still talking about multiple interactions with the ocean floor. So again, having a significant alterance on the environmental characteristics of the floor, which has a direct impact on the various species that live on or near the bottom of the ocean floor. So that's why I think this is an important piece to consider. And we did hear that from witness testimony. I would be happy to, again, if the committee wants to have a hard copy proposal, I'll be happy to get the text of that intervention that we had from a witness. But again, just being that we only had a couple of minutes to do all this, I don't have that immediately in front of me, but I do know that it was mentioned in the committee. So.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. Before I move to Ms. Stubbs, which I'm going to just want to let you know, if you do want to propose another sub-amendment, just to prepare something in writing for the clerks, so we can get out. So in the meantime, as Ms. Stubbs, if you do decide that you want to do that, it's something you may want to prepare in the interim, but I will go to Ms. Stubbs. Ms. Stubbs?
Oh, thanks, Chair. Well, I just want to thank MP Patzer for the points that he has made regarding our conservative intention to insert consideration of environmental characteristics through the process of issuing submerged land licenses. The whole point, of course, I would remind all colleagues and Canadians of Bill C-49 is precisely to expand the scope, the deliverables, the mandate of the regulators through this bill. And the regulators, of course, have decades of history and expertise and a skill set dealing with offshore petroleum development. And the entire point of C-49 is to add the regulatory scope and mandate enforcement powers around offshore renewable development. And so for the life of me, I certainly would not understand why a Liberal or Bloc or an NDP MP would vote against including the principle of the regulator in addition to the other improvements that have been made through the sub-amendments, why an MP of any party would vote against inserting the importance of the regulator under its new scope of mandate for offshore renewables, considering protection of environmental characteristics, in particular, as MP Patzer and other Conservative MPs have said here in witness testimony on, albeit the rushed and shortened timeline that the Liberals and NDP have enforced on this bill. The amendment, of course, just reflects those principles that witnesses have also said, too. So it seems to me that we can achieve all of the things we would appear to agree on, or I think that we appear to agree on, by keeping in, as Conservatives already just did, the support of the sub-amendments dealing with point A and point B. But certainly I would urge colleagues to accept this sub-amendment if MP Patzer is able to provide it to us, which would maintain the conservative inclusion to that the regulator maintain the environmental characteristics in consideration of the issuing submerged land licenses for offshore renewable development too. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. I'm going to go to Mr. Angus.
Yes, I'm just trying to follow the bouncing ball here. So the Conservatives had an amendment. Then they supported a sub-amendment that they said improved their amendment, but now they're not happy with the amendment that goes back to their amendment. So are they actually giving us a sub-amendment, or are we talking in circles? Because until we see a sub-amendment, I don't know what we're talking about.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Well, let's go to Ms. DeBrusen and then Mr. Dreesch, and then we'll come back to you because they might have. Mr. Brusen, go ahead.
I know I'm repeating this several times, but I really do think I should keep pointing out that the ministers from the provincial governments with whom this has all been negotiated have specifically, including a Conservative minister, have specifically stated that they do not want to see the changes that the Conservatives are proposing, and have talked about how they place great importance in their fishing industries, and that they also want to make sure that, you know, they will be working to avoid, mitigate, and minimize any impacts to our fisheries. That is the wording that's coming from Minister Rushton. But maybe just to help move this along, if I can ask the officials, I mean, we've heard now what the concerns are that are being raised by the Conservatives. What within this bill do we have that would be responding to some of the types of concerns that they're raising within this whole regime?
Thank you for the question. To reiterate, governments have an important role to play in undertaking research in advance of a call for bids process to help identify where suitable areas for offshore renewable energy development can be located, taking into consideration such factors as existing uses of the sea. Throughout the land tenure process, there are numerous opportunities to engage with stakeholders, including the fishery sector, on those site assessment decisions. And then when we are at the point of a specific project, through the impact assessment and other regulatory steps, the impacts, including on environmental impacts of those projects, will be assessed, and the regulator can impose terms and conditions through its authorization process. In addition, and outside of the Accord Acts, governments still have an important role to play in research, data collection, cumulative effects assessment, to understand the impacts of energy development in the offshore. And there certainly is a growing body of evidence from international jurisdictions that have had offshore renewable energy in their offshores for decades in terms of the impacts of renewables on the fishing sector and the ecosystem at large, that are helping to inform government decisions and the environmental assessment process. So those are the types of things that we're drawing on and that the provinces are drawing on to support the fishing sector in particular.
Thank you.
That's very helpful. Thanks.
I will go to Mr. Dreeshen.
Thank you. And perhaps to pick up on what Ms. Lixfeld had just mentioned, I'm curious to know, because this sort of would become then a no trawler zone. Okay, so you have to make sure that that's not part of what you're dealing with, because your electrical transmission lines, of course, are going to be on the ocean floor. So you're really taking in, so that then would have to be, I would assume, one of those conditions that that has been put on the industry. You would probably have in the discussions information from Europe and other places that would indicate what type of restrictions they've had to put in those zones where you would see, hundreds of acres or hectares of ocean that is that has these structures on them. We know that if it's an oil derrick or whatever, that there's restrictions around that particular, but that isn't this massive zone where you might see many dozens or hundreds of structures. So that's my question is that what you are referencing? And that's why I believe when we talk about environmental characteristics and we're trying to say, okay, well, it has to fit in with the way the fishers fish and the way in which things are done, is that being taken into consideration? And with the wording that you see in, let's start with CPC 12 and then tie in the amendment or the sub-amendment if we need to. Is that not being shown and looked at when we talk about environmental characteristics? Because I believe that's what we're trying to do with the sub-amendment, which of course hopefully we will have the time to be able to expand that and let everybody look at. So could you tell me just what you have seen and what other jurisdictions have done, whether they speak to the environmental characteristics of the region to where these renewable energy projects are located?
Thank you for the question. In general, terms and conditions speak to mitigation of effects of a specific project. They're not necessarily oriented towards preserving an ecosystem, for example. One of the things that is challenging is that the decision to move forward with a renewable energy project is a decision that is taken by government on the recommendation of the regulator. And so it is up to government to decide the balance of effects and to ensure that the regulator has the ability to impose terms and conditions that mitigate and manage any potential effects to the extent possible, and to ensure that projects are developed and implemented safely and with environmental safety and protection in mind. And so, and ultimately, that is what we feel the sub-amendment reinforces and is consistent with the role of the regulator in carrying out its activities and carrying out the instructions of government with respect to where and how development of these resources should occur.
If I may, just to respond. Yes, go ahead. Does that then speak to it seems like we're caught up on this term of environmental characteristics, as though we have to take that out of it because that hadn't been a term that was used when we were talking with the various provinces and so on. But is that not exactly what you're saying, is that we look at environmental characteristics and have to make decisions, and our regulators are going to make decisions based on the environmental characteristics? So I'm just having trouble trying to figure out why we don't just include that. And again, if we know we're on the right track, and it is really environmental characteristics, and that's what regulators have to deal with, why we can't take the time to include that and find the wording that Mr. Patzer is attempting to put together. Is it not environmental characteristics that each of those regulators have to pay attention to?
Certainly, assessing environmental considerations, environmental characteristics is part of is a way of describing the regulatory process. I think there was some concern with the original amendment as proposed, and the language around developing measures to assist in the preservation of the industry, including measures to assist in understanding and maintaining the characteristics. So it's hard to parse out just the word characteristics. When we looked at the original amendment that was proposed, it was read in the context, in a particular context, which is hard to place in the context of the Accord Acts and the regulatory decisions that need to be taken. And a different characterization or a different wording of the sub-amendment might lead us to a different perspective. But again, we do feel that the sub-amendment that was proposed by the provinces does address, in a way that is consistent with the purpose and the mandate of the regulators and the purpose of the Accord Acts, and acknowledges the importance of the fishing sector, the importance of mitigating and managing potential impacts of development on the offshore environment and the broader ecosystem.
And then perhaps that will make it easier then with those parameters set for us to be able to come up with the proper wording of a sub-amendment. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Okay. I think we've asked and answered lots of questions with this, and so Mr. Patzer, I'm going to go back to you. Do you have a sub-amendment that you would like to present, or would you like to continue and vote on the amendment as amended?
Yeah, I mean, so obviously we want to propose something like that. I mean, I had a quick chat with the clerk about some wording here, but also I still haven't seen the wording of the new amendment as we got after we voted on it. So I'm just, until I get the actual wording of the new amendment as we just voted on, it'd be easier to try to insert something in at that point, right? So, but I just kind of want to go back to a point on how, we did hear repeatedly through the process with witnesses that this was rushed. And that's why we are focused on trying to have a piece of legislation, the addition of this new piece in that is going to actually take into consideration the environmental characteristics of the offshore area. And the reason being, when we put in a new piece of legislation or we add in a substantive chunk to an existing one, as we're doing with the Atlantic Accords here, it's important that we take this opportunity to make sure that we do it right. I mean, if you set the standard now in legislation for what they need to do, rather than just wait to do this process when the SLL application happens, I mean, it's kind of like when it comes down to lots of other government bills that we have seen where there's a change to the criminal code or whatever, but it's so vague that there is actually no certainty in it. It's left to the courts to decide and determine what's actually going to happen and go on, which causes more uncertainty and delays, and then we get some crazy court rulings that end up happening that nobody agrees with. So I think it's important when we legislate that we make sure that we set the parameters that we want as legislators, because we're the ones that are responsible for doing that work. That's our job. I'm not saying that the provinces haven't considered these things, but when we hear from all these other witnesses how rushed the process was, or the fact that they were only given a couple of days to prepare their witness testimony because they weren't consulted, that's where it becomes problematic. And because they weren't given the time to adequately prepare what they would like to see in the consultation phase, that becomes problematic, and that's why we are going to bat for some of these key issues that came up during limited witness testimony on another rush piece of Liberal government legislation here. So I think it's important that we take the time to make sure that we get it right, that we raise up these specific points, again, that we heard throughout witness testimony. That's why this has become a bit of a sticking point here. And, you know, we definitely agreed to what the government proposed as a sub-amendment, because I do think it did help provide a little bit more, it kind of tightened it up a little bit, right, which is good, which is fine. And the reason why I wanted to let that pass was, okay, well, then maybe we can, you know, tweak a few things here rather than try to do a whole massive thing at once. Let's agree on a basis point, and then if there's a way to tweak that to get the certainty around the environmental characteristics, I just think it was important to do one and then we can do the other, right? That kind of answers Charlie's point about what the heck are we doing here. My initial ask was if there is a will from the committee to include environmental characteristics into this, so that way I would be able to come back to this committee with a hard proposal for the wording around that. Now, if we can do that on the fly here, great. But I was just trying to gauge the feel from the room to see if there was a willingness to do something on this, right? And I think we've outlined the reason and the case for why we should do that in regards to the characteristics of the offshore area, right? So, and I mean, if characteristics is too broad and vague of a term, well, I think characteristics actually is a good descriptive word, because we know that the ocean floor is active and changing, right? It's not just, it doesn't just stay the exact same. It shifts, it changes, it moves. Ocean currents, different things like that, the different species that are there, they all play a role in the environmental characteristics of the ocean floor. So it's a moving thing. It's a constant. It's not ever just completely stationary and idle as other, you know, as say a mountainside would be. But even that changes, right? We know that. So it's important that we have wording in here that is going to properly reflect what is going to provide the most certainty for investors and proponents, for the courts. There's a reason why we have the Department of Justice here, right? I mean, we're trying to make sure that we have things that are legally going to work. But as legislators, it is our job to make sure that we have everything in this bill that needs to be there, right? Mm-hmm. And, you know, again, I'm not saying that the provinces are wrong. I'm just saying that I think that while we have this bill in front of us, it is important to take the time to make inclusions in here that possibly were missed or were skipped over. And again, we get back to the point that this bill was rushed. And here we are. We look at the long, extensive list of amendments that have been proposed here. I mean, I've only ever had one or two bills before me in committee over my 4 years as an elected MP. And this has some of the most, I think this has the most amendments that I have seen proposed to a piece of legislation. So, well. Yeah, we did. So, I mean, but beyond that, like that's, but my point being that when you're working with the provinces on something like this, you know, again, we want to make sure we get this bill right. We have the stakeholders' testimony that is very specific to this. And part of why marine protected areas become a thing, I mean, there's a few aspects that go into it, but a lot of it is about preserving the condition of the area that we are protecting, whether it's an MPA, whether it's a protected land. It's about preserving the condition of the environment. And I think when we've talked to these groups, to the fisher groups that were here, they want to see as much of the environment in and around any offshore renewable development to be as closely preserved and maintained as it possibly can be. And if there are substantive alterations to the environmental characteristics of the area, that's where problems do occur. And we've seen and heard the alarm bells go from witnesses at our committee, but also when you take a browse through the news, we have seen and heard from around the world what has happened when they didn't take these considerations seriously when they were legislating on frameworks around it. So it's important that we take the warnings from other places around the world, apply them here. We had witness testimony in this very committee that actually pointed to this very issue, which is why we have this part of the amendment. So I think that I do think that it's important that we take the time to do this properly and do this right. I will come back to the committee with some hard language here. And like I said, I'll pull up the witness testimony, and I'll definitely be proposing something in writing when I get a chance to actually see the new amendment in writing. Then I can work with it and make sure I get it done properly. But I also, part of this whole point was to see, does the committee agree that we should have a little bit more language around it? Because I don't want to waste my time and your time by bringing back an amendment that nobody's going to want to see anyway. So I'm just wondering if there's a broad consensus to try to see something around that. Then I can bring something there, and then we can work. If it needs to be massaged a little bit to make it fit, then great. But I just want to make sure that I'm not going to be wasting my time and yours by doing that. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patzer. I will now proceed to Mr. Angus.
Well, thank you. In all my years, when we vote on an amendment, we accept the amendment and we understand what's in the amendment. So once we've accepted the amendment, then we vote on the main motion unless there is a sub-amendment, but there hasn't been a sub-amendment. We don't get a timeout then to go study and then to think and come up with some ideas. Like we're in the middle of clause by clause. Either they have a sub-amendment ready to go or they don't. And I call the question that we have to move on. And I'm concerned about trying to bring forward amendments and sub-amendments that are actually undermining the provincial jurisdiction here. We hear the Conservatives. If Danielle Smith wants to burn the planet, it's all about provincial jurisdiction. If Newfoundland and Labrador and Nova Scotia have an accord that's been in place that needs the federal to sign off on, then I say let's do it. So there is no sub-amendment. Without a sub-amendment, I'm not going to be willing to suspend and give time till people think up one. Either it's there or it's not. So I say we vote on the amendment as is and move on.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. We have Ms. Stubbs.
Thank you, Chair. I suspect that MP Patzer will want to respond after, but I'll just take this moment to say, let's just spare the sanctimony around here with the crowing about listening to provincial premiers, if we will, since the NDP Liberals actually have zero problem ignoring the Liberal Newfoundland Premier, who has asked over and over and over to spike the carbon tax hike on April 1st. So we have already demonstrated our willingness to work in good favor by accepting the two sub-amendments. MP Patzer has summarized exactly why we are gauging the will of the elected members of this committee to consider including the Conservatives' specific language on protecting and maintaining the environmental characteristics in the case of offshore renewable development and explicitly include this in C49. And here is why. Because it is not enough at this point, after 9 years, for the Liberals, propped up by the NDP, to say, just trust us. I will give this example. It has been 5 months since the Supreme Court of Canada said that the 5-year-old law based on Bill C-69 that has been in place for half a decade is largely unconstitutional. The Supreme Court said that less than 6% of the law that is based on Bill C-69 stands up. Including, as we've discussed multiple times in the debate on this rushed bill, the dozens of references that are here in C-49 from C-69, which will automatically cause this bill, if it's passed as written, to be vulnerable for litigation and challenges, causing even more uncertainty for offshore petroleum developers, obviously, but also for any private sector proponents who want to launch into offshore renewable development too. So this is why, so Canadians understand, why Conservative MPs on this committee are trying to compel the NDP, the Liberal, and the Bloc members of this committee to be explicit about our elected representatives' priority to protect and maintain the environmental characteristics according to the expanded new scope and scale of the mandate that C-49 will provide for regulators. And also, in addition to my colleagues' tough but fair and accurate comment on Conservatives' 50,000 amendments to Bill C-50, the Just Transition, let me just say, or 20,000, let me just say for the record, because I heard him quip it, those were not generated by AI. Second of all, no, and I answered media about that, so I'm not sure why you're claiming it. Second of all, thank goodness that Conservatives actually tried to propose amendments to C-50, given that the government's own internal briefings show that Bill C-50, the Just Transition, will kill 170 oil and gas jobs immediately and disrupt the livelihoods of 2.7 million Canadians in construction, in manufacturing, in agriculture, in transportation, and in energy. But of course, the truth is, because of the actions of the NDP Liberals bloc MPs on this committee, there will be no debate on Bill C-50, and not a single Canadian will be able to be heard from on that bill. So this is why it is not. It is so. This is why it's not sufficient. This is why MP Patzer is arguing to make it explicit in the legislation.
Ms. Stubbs, we have
this
a
isn't
point
on
of
the
order.
officials.
If
this
I could
is,
just
no,
ask
I'm going to
you
finish my comments.
I'll just
Thanks,
ask you
Chair.
to pause. I will go. Okay, colleagues.
I'm sorry, you're talking
everybody,
in the mic.
I will
so
ask
do as I. So what you want me to do right now is
I will
do
ask
as you say, but not as you do,
everybody
right?
to
Yeah, that's exactly
halt.
right. That's
We have a
exactly
point of order. We have a point
Don't
of order.
tell me what to do, John, and go run in the
We
provincial
have-
legislature like
Ms.
you said you
Stubbs,
want to.
I'll just ask you to hold, please, for a moment. We have
Point
a
of
point of order.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Aldig just mouthed
So-
the words F off to my colleague right here. I demand an apology for
Hey,
Mr. Aldig. I saw that, John.
We have
John.
We
Not
have
so many sunny
we
ways
have
are
a point
feminists.
of order.
I guess 'cause
Okay,
it's
we will suspend.
2024. We're not feminists anymore.
Suspension, and Ms. Stubbs, I'm going to go back to you as you had the floor.
Chair, thank you for allowing me to conclude my remarks. So my main point was that this is the reason that Conservatives have proposed to insert explicitly the language around protecting and maintaining environmental characteristics, because we can't just take across our fingers and hope that things happen, and our job as legislators here is to make sure that it is embedded with clarity and principles around which I would think that we would all agree. And so that is why Conservatives have proposed that amendment in the first place, worked in good faith to accept the sub-amendments, and hope that we will be able to work in further good faith to improve this bill even more on this topic.
Thank you, Ms. Stubbs. I'm going to now go to Mr. Bruson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It looks like there is still a whole bunch of conversation happening around Clause 147. So what I would propose is if we could get unanimous consent to stand down 147 and hold it till the end, and at the same time to get UC to reopen and stand down Clause 38, which is its mirror image clause in the Newfoundland portion, so that we can then have a conversation more fully on each of those clauses.
Thank you, Mr. Bruson. So do we have unanimous consent, and is it clear on everybody that is to stand down currently Clause 147 and also to reopen Clause 38 in the previous portion of the bill and stand that down because they are mirroring clauses to later on, so you can have think a little bit more about the changes you may want to make and what you may want to do with them. That's clear. Do we have unanimous consent? We do? Okay. Thank you.
Point of order, Chair.
Mr. Patzer, just give me one moment and I'll go to your point of order.
Okay.
Mr. Patzer, go ahead on your point of order.
Thank you, Chair. Now, right before we suspended, as my colleague, Mrs. Stubbs, was giving her intervention, we hear a lot from the Liberals about, respect, respect, respect. But I just want to give Mr. Aldig this opportunity to apologize for telling my colleague, Mrs. Stubbs, to F-word off. He mouthed the words. I saw him do it. So did my colleague, Mrs. Stubbs. I know he did it. I would like to afford him the opportunity to unreservedly apologize, because if this is truly about respect and integrity, I would like to afford him the opportunity to show that those are principles that he upholds.
Thank you for that opportunity. I absolutely apologize if I said anything. I do get a bit frustrated when there are personal attacks and things being said, but I shouldn't have expressed my frustration in the way that I did. I apologize to everyone. We need to show the respect and uphold the dignity of this place, and I will do my best to do that as we continue working forward on this legislation.
Right. To be clear, the only personal attack was to my colleague, Mrs. Stubbs. She was merely outlining what the government had done for a period of time, which is not a
Point of
personal
order.
attack, but
Point of order.
Thank you. So I'm going to go to you on a point of order, Mr. Angus. And colleagues, I just want to remind everyone, thank you for your intervention and thank you for providing that clarity and apology, Mr. Aldag. Colleagues, we work on committee together and that we use appropriate language and that we conduct ourselves in that manner. So I'm glad that we've been able to come to a thoughtful resolution on that. And so thank you, all parties on that. I'm going to go to a point of order to Mr. Angus. Mr. Angus, on the point of order.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to thank Mr. Aldag for withdrawing. That is what is, I think, expected. And it's also a tradition in Parliament that when someone apologizes, that we accept the apology. What I witnessed just when that was happening was I thought, a disgraceful gong show that embarrassed our committee. And there were multiple participants on the Conservative side. I'm not going to name them, but I thank Mr. Aldag for apologizing, and I think we need to move on and actually get the job done that Canadians sent us here to do and show that we're going to do this properly and with professionalism.
Thank you on your point of order on that. So, Mr. And colleagues, I don't want to get into a point of order and a point of order, but I have a point of order for Mr. Dreeshen.
Well, thank you. What Mr. Angus just indicated was that there was much more disorder, and of course, he named our side for this, which he does on a regular basis. The point was, I believe, was that perhaps Mr. Aldag had a bit more of a conditional apology, that there was a lot of exchange going back and forth that was negative. I'm sorry, is somebody talking?
Colleagues, and I don't want to cut you off, Mr. Dreeshen. I've just noticed we do have bells, and so we'll leave it at that. But I will have to, at this point, ask colleagues for unanimous consent to continue, or we do have bells, and we...
Before the bells. Chair had asked to speak before the bells.
We need
I
unanimous.
actually just wanted to
I
thank
know,
John,
Ms. Stubbs. We do not have, unless we have unanimous consent, we cannot because we do have bells.
I asked to speak before.
But we have, unless we have
He was
unanimous
still
consent.
speaking when the bells started, so
I know.
we can't have
but
rules
we
for
need,
the
we
and
need
not for me,
unanimous
right?
consent. Do we have unanimous
wow.
consent to continue? Yes. No, we do not have unanimous consent. Sorry. Thank you, everyone. Great day's work. Meeting adjourned.